All right, I think we are live now. Welcome everyone to the National Museum of Civil War Medicine live stream. I am David Price, Executive Director of the museum, and I have with me Tracey McIntire, our Director of Education, Communications. She's Director of everything today, but her official title is Communications Director, but here at the museum we do, everybody does everything. And we have a special guest today, Dr. Tom Clemens. Welcome, Tom.
Happy to be here.
He is here to talk about the Pry-House Field Hospital and in regards to it being McClellan's headquarters. Was it really? The sign says it is, but Tom made an interesting discovery a few years back, and we had him do this presentation at the Pry-House, which I think was super cool. And the thing we'll discuss today is it really is up my alley, because I fell in love with history because I suddenly realized it is as unknown as the future. None of us are in the future, and none of us were really in the past, especially 150, 160 years ago. So it's the unknown is kind of what's intriguing, and this is one of the rabbit holes that I'm excited to discuss today. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Tracey to start it off, and these guys are going to have a discussion. I'm going to be monitoring comments, and it is a reminder, we won't have much of a medical topic today, but we are not medical professionals. So please don't take any advice from us regarding that. And if you do have questions, please, I will be monitoring the comments, and there'll be a few times where we can pipe in and get Tom to answer your questions. So Tracey, take it away.
Okay, thanks, David. Welcome, Tom. I wonder if you could tell our audience just a little bit about yourself and how you got interested in Civil War history.
Oh my. Well, I was about 10 or 11 years old when the centennial happened. And what was very much caught up in the centennial events as a teenager, I mean, you know, there wasn't an awful lot, someone that age, reading material for me, but there was the American Heritage Book of Civil War, which got a lot of us hooked, I think. And I guess in terms of interest in Civil War, I never grew up. And of course, when I moved into Washington County here, 45 years or so ago, I found myself near Antietam and just have been captivated with everything to do with Antietam ever since. I was a college professor at Hagerstown Community College for over 30 years, and am retired now, and have done a lot of writing and a lot of speaking about Antietam battlefield.
And you're president of the Safe Historic Antietam Foundation.
Yes, a nonprofit 501c3 battlefield preservation group. We work very cooperatively with the American Battlefield Trust, the big national organization, and we have preserved a lot of land at Antietam and some other sites. One of the things that we helped save was the Tolson's Chapel, an 1866-67 church for freed slaves, and also served as a Freedmen's Bureau school. And just this past summer, it was named a National Historic Landmark.
Oh, that's great. That's great.
It would not have been there if we hadn't taken ownership of it and hung on to it for a while until a friends group started up. So we have preserved a lot of land. We're an all-volunteer organization. Being the president of it is like a full-time job, except I don't get paid.
Well, that's awesome. Thank you for your work with them. Now that since we're talking about Antietam, let's get into the Pry-House and what you discovered about it.
Okay.
I don't know what inspired you to start this search.
What inspired me to start this search was a question that I couldn't answer off the top of my head. I didn't go looking for this, but a friend of mine who was writing about Antietam, Ethan Rayfuse, who you may have heard of. He's written a number of books and is a professor at the War College in Leavenworth, Kansas. And he asked me if McClellan used the Pry House as his headquarters the entire 5 days he was on the eastern bank of Antietam Creek. And I said, I don't know, let me look into that. So I started looking into it and I found some interesting stuff. And I will pause a moment to say I am not a computer expert, so I'm going to share my screen now, but it might take me a moment to get my pictures up and moving. So please bear with me.
Okay.
All right, somewhere here.
Looking good.
There we go.
Okay. So now I can't see everybody in the audience, but some of you may be familiar with this sign, which is off of Route 34, or what we would call at Civil War period, the Boonsboro Shepherdstown Turnpike. And this is up on the top of the eastern bluffs of the Antietam Creek, opposite the Confederate line and opposite the battlefield as we know it. And according to the National Park Service, it says Pry House Field Hospital and McClellan's Headquarters. Here is a photo of it taken in the 1880s by two brothers, Dwight and Walter Biscoe. You'll notice that they call it the Fry House with an F. But this is close to what the house looked like at the time of the battle. And the people who lived here, Philip and Elizabeth Pry and their children, were present in the house a few days before the Battle of Antietam, when, according to the Pry House family tradition, a staff officer of McClellan, a fellow named George Armstrong Custer, rode up the driveway here and asked the Pry family if the general could use their home as a headquarters. And the Pry family were very proud of this and repeated this story for the rest of their time here, that this had been McClellan's headquarters. The Pry family's story is actually somewhat sad. This battle, even though it didn't happen on their property, ruined them financially. Everything on the farm was taken or destroyed, and they ultimately went bankrupt and moved to Tennessee in the 1870s. But when Thomas J.C. Williams published his History of Washington County in the early 1900s, he repeated the Pry family story that this had been George McClellan's headquarters during the Battle of Antietam. Here is a photo of the house as it looks today, restored by the National Park Service. And here is a photo that was taken on September 18th. A photographer named Alexander Gardner, working for a studio owner by the name of Matthew Brady, took this photograph the day after the battle. And there were a series of photographs taken around the battlefield in the next couple days. A historian who lives in Gettysburg named Bill Frassanito did a book called Antietam, The Photographic Legacy of America's Bloodiest Day. And this photograph is in that book. And Bill has styled this again as McClellan's headquarters. Now, I've seen this photo hundreds of times, literally, over the 40 some years I've lived here, and even before, because I think I bought Bill's book very early on. But it never really struck me until I went digging into this and pulled up the October 1st, 1862 return of the quartermaster's general's report for the Army of the Potomac. So this is 13, 14 days after the battle. And the headquarters consists of a little over 1,000 men, 120 wagons, 6 ambulances, and 983 horses. Now here is this photograph of the house the day after the battle. And the first question that popped into my mind when I read that report is, where is everybody if this is headquarters? 1,000 men, 120 wagons, 900 horses. And what do we see in this picture? Two guys sitting here in front of the house and a couple of horses tied up. Does this make you suspicious? It did me.
Yeah, you know, even if all of the horses and all of the wagons were to the right, you know, near the barn, there's bound to be a couple of guys sitting on the porch or hanging out on the side of the house or something.
The day after the battle, this should be a beehive of activity.
Yeah.
Now, part of the problem is that the Prys were, of course, civilians, and they don't know much about military. And so there is this idea that headquarters is wherever the commanding general happens to be. There's a apocryphal story I used to illustrate this, but a Union general named John Pope was trying very much to impress President Lincoln and took to styling his dispatches to Washington headquarters in the saddle, which prompted Lincoln to remark supposedly that General Pope had his headquarters where his hindquarters ought to be. But
yeah, that was going to be my first question was, you know, what is the definition of a headquarters?
You have led me exactly where I want to go. Thank you, Tracey. What is a headquarters? It's a lot of things. First of all, there is a retinue of staff officers. You've got your adjutant general, your inspector general, aides de camp, commissary, quartermaster, ordnance. McClellan had a staff of 30 some officers. But in addition to that, we have a battalion of engineers, 4 companies of cavalry designated as the headquarters guard, 3 companies of cavalry as the provost guard, and 4 companies of infantry and 4 companies of cavalry, 6 infantry, a regiment of infantry as the headquarters guard. There's a lot of people. And on top of that, you got the clerks and the cooks and the wagon drivers and everybody else. It's over 1,000 people. And, you know, if you've ever been to the Pry House, yes, there was a lot of land around it, but what do 1,000 men and 900 and some horses need to do every day? Get to water. Not much around the Pry House, is there?
Right.
So
can I ask a question? What
sure.
was one of the things that we talk about here at the museum is the fact that, you know, they place these field hospitals a lot of times in barns because it had bedding, there was you know, airflow, and I always assumed there was a water source because you did have to feed your animals. Was there a well house down there?
There was a root cellar and there was some sort of spring there, yes.
Okay. And then secondly, we talk about, you know, nearly 500 or so patients being treated in the barn. There would have still been patients in the barn to the right of that image, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. There's no question about that. And Gordy interrogated me thoroughly about whether, in fact, Letterman was there or not. And I'm pretty sure he was. But let's go back a little bit on this. McClellan arrives on the afternoon of the 15th, pursuing what he believes to be a demoralized and retreating Confederate army. He gets to these eastern bluffs to observe the Confederate army, and that evening returns to the village of Keedysville, which is about 3 miles due east of Sharpsburg on this Shepherdstown, Boonsboro Turnpike. And this is the house where McClellan took dinner on the night of September 15th. It's referred to in town as the Hess House, built by Jacob Hess in 1768, next to a mill that he put on the Little Antietam Creek here. And McClellan's chief of staff, who was also his father-in-law, Randolph Marcy, arranged for McClellan to eat dinner in the home of a Unionist family living in Keedysville. The story is that he ate dinner at this house, and that Marcy also asked them if the general could sleep in the house overnight, but he chose not to, wanting to go forward to be nearer the front lines, because he obviously doesn't know exactly what's going to happen. Now, from here, we're going to go into a book called The Personal Recollections of the War, written by David Hunter Strother, this fellow with the magnificent beard here on the right of your screen. He was a staff officer to McClellan. He was a topographical engineer. And in his book, he talks about the fact that the general rode to the front again, leaving the body of retinue awaiting orders in a grove. And he talks about that on the night of the 15th, after he had dinner, McClellan went forward. Strother talks about the staff spending the night in a grove of trees next to a church. Luckily, at that point in time, there was only one church in Keedysville, so that made the research very easy. This is the German Reformed Church in Keedysville, which was also used as a hospital, and next to it was a grove of oak trees, some of which still remain, interestingly enough. And Strother says that the staff spent the night there, and so he doesn't name it particularly, but it seems that McClellan probably stayed here, either in the grove tree with the staff or sleeping in the church that night, because Strother suggests that, and I'm quoting him here, there were insufficient rooms for all the staff at the Pry House, and that on the morning of the 16th, McClellan took breakfast and went forward to observe the battlefield, or in that, toward the Pry House. So he probably spent the night in this church here on the night of the 15th. There was no headquarters set up yet. He is pursuing what he believes demoralized, defeated army. He has got a long, narrow road that most of his army is coming down. You're not going to put 120 headquarters wagons at the head of the column. They're going to be at the rear. So there is no headquarters area set up on the 15th. This is what the Mount Vernon Church looks like today. It was extensively remodeled in the 1890s. And so you can see the foundation here is probably original, and maybe even much of the brick structure, but it was extensively redone. And right here next to it is a sign put up by Safe Historic Antietam Foundation telling you that this is headquarters on the night of the 15th and a hospital site.
Oh, nice.
In fact, we will put up a sign like this at any documented hospital site relating to the Maryland campaign. So if you know anybody who owns a house that was used as a hospital or any structure, we will put up a sign like that that designates it as a hospital site. And it does have on the bottom of it private property so that people don't come walking into your house.
Hey, Tom, do you know about how many patients were treated at that site, at that church?
Not to be a wise guy, but that's your bailiwick, not mine.
We'll have to ask Terry.
Yeah, we'll ask down the hall.
Yeah.
Hey, one quick question about, McClellan following the army, and he shows up at night. About how big was his entourage? I hear all these stories about Lincoln, riding across town by himself. When you're General McClellan and you're moving ahead the way they are chasing Lee here, about how many officers are with him or support staff are with him as he goes, like right near him physically, rather than all of his boxes being behind him or whatever.
Yeah, there's a company or two of cavalry that are designated as his escort, so they would go pretty much wherever he does, and some portion of his staff. They're not all always with him. Obviously, they're running other errands and doing other duties, but some of his staff, and let's say maybe a company or two of cavalry. So staff and cavalry together, no more than 50 people, probably less. All right. Now, There was an entire infantry regiment that was designated as headquarters guard, and that was the 93rd New York Infantry. And that was their job, was to guard headquarters. So they travel not with McClellan, but with all the wagons and tents and paraphernalia that constitute the physical headquarters. Their regimental history talks about September 16th, moved to Keedysville, where headquarters of the Army were established during the Battle of Antietam. Sorry, that's a house phone. And I don't know anybody named Spam, so. So that's the 93rd headquarters. He says on the 20th, the regiment moved to Sharpsburg. So these are the 5 days that McClellan is on the East Bluffs. Headquarters, he says, is in Keedysville, according to the regimental history. And a clue is in a letter from a member of that regiment. This is First Sergeant R.S. Robertson of Company I, who in a letter says, and I quote, "On the next day," he's talking about September 16, "we marched to Keedysville near Antietam Creek, on the other side of which was Lee's army. Heavy cannonading was going on till noon, and in every direction troops were marching and counter-marching. In the early evening, McClellan's headquarters were established well to the front. It was determined to erect tents there for the night." Now, I'm pretty sure he's talking about around the Pry House. And he says, "Hardly had the lines been established and the tents begun to be erected when a Confederate battery opened up on us, and haste was made to locate some more sheltered spot, which was selected close to the little village of Keedysville. General McClellan, however, did not occupy his tent that night, but slept with some of his aides on the line of battle." End quote. So what's he saying? They thought about putting headquarters at the Pry House, and they found one major flaw. It's in range of enemy artillery. That's not where you put headquarters, right? So they go back to Keedysville and establish the headquarters. And so when I found that letter, I thought, okay, now I'm on to something. I know roughly where it is. It's somewhere in Keedysville. Where in Keedysville was the question. Now, you and Tracey are probably familiar with this, but some of the folks around may not, that after the war, the government allowed for damage claims to be filed by loyal citizens whose property was damaged or consumed by Union soldiers. It was a very narrow definition. They weren't going to reimburse any damage done by Confederates. That was Jeff Davis's problem. They, in fact, ensured that anybody filing a claim for damage had to be a loyal Union citizen. If you were a secessionist, they wouldn't reimburse you. And oh yes, there were some games played there, because all it took was one person step up and say, "I saw him with a Confederate flag," and boom, you don't get any reimbursement. So these damage claim files are kept in the National Archives in Washington, D.C. Unfortunately, they are not filed alphabetically or regionally. I'm sorry, they are not filed regionally, they're filed alphabetically. So you have to know the last names of people filing claims and keep digging until you find somebody who says, "Hey, I want reimbursement because headquarters was on my farm." It only took 4 days.
Wow.
But I found a damage claim file by a fellow named John J. Keedy, who lived in Keedysville. In fact, the name of Keedysville is for him and his family. Up until 1842, the village was known as Centerville. And that name sticks around for a while. If you look at Lee's dispatches in the official records, one of them is headed Centerville, Maryland. So the old name was still around for a lot of people and probably on maps, but it had changed in 1842 because they wanted to get their own post office. And the U.S. Postal Service said, "We already have a Centerville, Maryland post office. So if you want a post office, you have to pick another name." So in 1842, they changed the name of the village to Keedysville. And John J. Keedy was a very prominent citizen at that point in time. And so it was named for him and his family. In his damage claim, Keedy very emphatically says, and I quote, "General McClellan had his camp on my place." And he also says headquarters was about the place. Now, John died in 1868, but his son, Christian Keedy, similarly claimed headquarters about the place, says that he asked for a guard around his cornfield, yeah, and that it was immediately furnished, which means that he asked somebody important, probably somebody on the staff. And even more, I think, confirming of this is that a board of officers examined Keedy's claim and he got paid. And the government was very parsimonious about dishing out money. So if he made a claim and got paid, they basically were convinced that he was correct. Now, what you're looking at here is a picture of the barn on the Keedy farm. The house that John Jay lived in is no longer standing, but the barn is, and this lower here, you can see 1850, that is stamped into one of the hinges on the door of the barn. And here is Keedy initials carved into it with 1857. So this is the original barn. The house was destroyed not long after the battle. It was used as a hospital as well, although it was described as a fairly small log cabin. Christian built a very large brick house in 1876, probably on the same place where the cabin sat. And it's a very nice Victorian house in good condition, and the barn is still there, and there's about 20 acres. And as of last fall, it's on the market for about $1.3 million. If anybody wants to have a historic house in Keedysville, let me know. But anyway.
I'll check my bank account.
Yeah, I know where you work. Now, where was McClellan? On the day of the battle, we have another source that puts McClellan here, again, Strother's memoir. He mentions that shortly after the rise in volume of gunfire at about 7:30 in the morning, horses were forthwith ordered, and we rode rapidly to a commanding knoll on the eastern side of the Turnpike, about the center of the line of battle and nearly opposite the town of Sharpsburg. This was the same point from which the general reconnoitered on Monday afternoon, September 15th, and afforded the most comprehensive view of the field that could be had from any single point. So on this illustration here, you can see Philip Pry House, a farm, which is mistakenly labeled headquarters. And here is the turnpike leading from Boonsboro in this direction toward Sharpsburg and Shepherdstown. Here is the town of Sharpsburg with Lee's headquarters well in rear of it. And right here on this little high point here, and I'll give you the zoom in just a second. You can see this is labeled very faintly McClellan's Post of Observation, and it is directly opposite the lane that leads down to the Pry House. Today there is a farm on that property, and just to the west a little bit, there is a church as well. But this is where McClellan spent a good deal of the day watching the battle. Now, let me go back a slide a moment. This ridge here, overlooking the Antietam, is where much of the long-range cannons of McClellan's army will be located that make life miserable for all the Confederates in this part of the battlefield. But by being on a higher hill behind them, McClellan is not trying to look through cannon smoke to observe the battle. He's looking over it. He's higher up. He's also farther back. So again, this is where he spent much of the day. There's no doubt he spent the night in the house on the night of the 16th, but his staff and everybody else are back in Keedysville, as I pointed out. Okay. Couple other pieces of evidence here that I found that are intriguing. Here is the town of Keedysville with the Boonsboro Shepherdstown Turnpike running through. And this is a road that goes essentially from east to west. This was the trace of a very early road. This is probably the route that Braddock's army marched in the 1750s, going out to fight the French at Fort Duquesne and the French and Indian War. The Hess House is right here, just off of this road. But in a dispatch that was sent by the Chief of Staff, Marcy, to General Meade, titled Commanding 1st Army Corps, September 17, 1862. Now, this will be a trivia question for Tracey, but Meade commanding the 1st Corps? What does that mean?
Sorry, what?
Meade commanding the 1st Corps?
Corps?
This message is sent to General Meade commanding 1st Corps
What
on the
happened to
17th.
Hooker?
Huh?
What happened to Hooker?
Oh, that's what I was going to ask you.
Well,
he got wounded.
He got wounded in the foot and sent to Pry House.
Sent to Pry House. So
Right.
who takes command?
Meade.
Yeah. And interesting sidebar, not because he's senior.
Ah,
When Hooker was wounded, one of McClellan's staff officers, who you may recognize, a guy who was chief of cavalry, an administrative position, not the commander, a fellow named John Buford,
oh, yes.
was over there in the East Woods when Hooker was wounded. Hooker looked up and said, I would give half of everything I own for Meade to take command of the Corps. Buford hops on his horse, rides across the creek to McClellan and says, hey, Hooker wants Meade to take command. McClellan says, fine. So here is a dispatch sent to General Meade dated September 17 from Marcy. And I quote, the commanding general directs that you send an aide de camp to headquarters camp at the end of the town of Keedysville to the right of the road to report the condition of things in your corps and to receive orders for tomorrow. The aide who takes this will conduct your staff officer to the camp. Now, as Tracey well knows, on the night of the 17th, 1st Corps is camped around the Joseph Poffberger farm on the north end of the battlefield. And the quickest way from there to Keedysville and headquarters camp would be over the upper bridge right here, which today, when you cross the bridge, you turn to the right and go this way into Keedysville, because this road is no longer a through road. But in 1862 it was, so that aide de camp would have crossed the bridge, come right up this road and right down into Keedysville, and on the right of the road was headquarters camp. What does that look like today? That. This was an open meadow on John J. Keedy's farm. And although we can't see it in this photograph, it is relatively flat. It tapers down very gradually to the Little Antietam Creek, where all those people and 980 some horses can get to water very easily. Today, of course, the bypass around Main Street in Keedysville goes right through the middle of what was this headquarters camp. But this is where it was. Today, it's a little housing development of about a dozen houses or so. And just out of the frame here on the right, we have erected a little shaft sign that says General McClellan's Headquarters. It's right next to the county highway garage. If you turn on Kaufman Farms Road, you can stop and see it. So I'm pretty confident we have located then exactly where headquarters was, right here. That's the Little Antietam Creek. If you go to the other side of the road here, there is a cemetery that was there at the time of the battle, and the rise in ground makes the access to the creek all but impossible. It's practically a cliff north of this road, but south of this road, it's a big open meadow that gently slopes down the creek. Perfect place for a headquarters camp. But as they say on TV, wait, there's more. General Andrew Atkinson Humphreys. Again, we'll quiz Tracy.
Uh-oh.
What does he command at the battle?
Was he the artillery?
5th Corps,
5th Corps, okay.
3rd Division, the one that arrives on the morning of the 18th. He's got 9 brand new, recently recruited Pennsylvania regiments. One of the reasons that McClellan deferred attacking on the morning of the 18th is he was waiting for Humphreys' division to arrive. They had left Frederick the day of the battle and had marched through the afternoon and all night and arrived on the morning of the 18th. Now, in his after-action report, McClellan says that one of the reasons he didn't attack was that Humphreys was not there in time to be used. Humphreys took great umbrage at that and wrote a little nastygram saying that his division was perfectly capable of going into battle, even though they had marched all night. I don't think so. But he has this clue in his letter. He says that he stopped his division on the road from Boonsboro at McClellans Headquarters not later than 7 a.m. to report in person. After spending some time there, he was told to move on to General Porter's position, Porter commanding 5th Corps, which he says he reached about 9:30 after being, and I quote, delayed some 30 minutes in Keedysville by other troops. Now, if McClellan's headquarters had been at the Pry House, he would have been at Porter's position already. He could not have been delayed 30 minutes going through Keedysville like he says he was. So this confirms that that was in fact headquarters in Keedysville. This is another map that's in the official records atlas. And again, they say this is headquarters at the Pry House with signal stations connecting to the battlefield and to Red Hill behind them. But here, just outside of Keedysville, is a signal station communicating with Washington Monument on South Mountain. And from there, they are communicating by flag and eventually telegraph to Frederick and ultimately to Washington, D.C. Why would they put that there if headquarters was here? Headquarters is there. This is a hill just on the southeast part of town. And there's a signal station to connect with Washington there, which makes sense for headquarters. Yes? Yes,
definitely. Knowing a little bit about Signal Corps, I would agree.
Okay.
Yeah, and it looks like from, with that signal station there, you could get reports from the front line of the battle at the Pry House of that overlook, and then also straight from headquarters, right? It's almost like the perfect triangle.
Exactly. Yeah, I'm not saying Pry House wasn't used. It just was not headquarters. One more piece of evidence. Captain Claremont Best, who commanded the 12th Corps artillery, and Tracy knows a little bit about artillery too. In his official after-action report written September 22nd, 1862, he says, and I quote, "At 2 a.m. on the morning of the 17th, I was ordered by General Mansfield to proceed in person to the rear to post 2 batteries of artillery of the Corps on some hills adjacent to the headquarters of General McClellan, to be pointed out by a staff officer." Now, here are the 2 batteries. This is McGilvery's and Robinson's batteries of main artillery. They are on the bluffs right over above Upper Bridge. The idea being you've got 1st Corps going over and 12th Corps going over. If they have to fall back, here is your safety. You've got 2 batteries of long-range guns to cover a retreat. Make sense?
Makes sense.
But it says they're next to headquarters. Here's the Pry House. Here's headquarters just down the road from where those batteries are. Which do you think is next to headquarters?
Right.
Yeah, it's there. One last bit here. There is also a telegram sent to Sumner, commanding headquarters, commanding 2nd Corps from I'm sorry, this is a dispatch, not a telegram. dispatch sent to Sumner, who commanded the Second Corps of the Army from headquarters, dated September 16th, 9:30 in the morning, day before the battle. Where is the headquarters staff that morning? Here in Keedysville, right next to the church.
Mhm.
Major General Sumner, General McClellan desires you to inform him the moment the head of Mansfield's corps comes up. The general will be, for the present, at General Hooker's headquarters. Where's General Hooker's headquarters? If you go back to Bill Frasanito's book and look at the writing here in Bill's notes, Bill says, more intriguing, Gardner's original label of the photo is Hooker's headquarters. Unlike Army headquarters, a Corps headquarters would be much smaller. General Hooker's headquarters on October 1st, 13 officers, 30 enlisted men, 9 wagons, 3 ambulances. So I would argue to you that the Pry House is a headquarters. It's just not McClellan's. It's probably Hooker's headquarters. Did you ever wonder why they took Hooker to McClellan's headquarters when Hooker was wounded? Wouldn't they take him to his own headquarters?
That's interesting, because I always thought he was at the Poffenberger farm.
No, they take him to the Pry House. He's there with Richardson.
No, I mean, I always thought Hooker's headquarters was at the Poffenberger farm.
His field headquarters, yeah, but his headquarters, yeah.
Okay, then we get there. That's where we get into the definition of headquarters thing.
Yep, yeah. It makes a difference. So that's basically what I have found, and I'm pretty convinced is accurate, is that the Pry House was used as a headquarters, probably by Hooker and Richardson, which is why they took both of them there. And if you go back to the afternoon of the 15th of September, who were the first troops on that eastern bluff of the creek? Richardson's division leading the essentially pursuit, and right behind him, Hooker's corps. And those two generals are going to pick out the nicest house in the neighborhood and set up shop.
That makes sense.
Make sense?
Makes sense.
I tell you what, I like this story better. You know, it makes that location even more interesting to me.
Yeah.
We have more generals.
Yeah.
Well,
it's a general headquarters.
It's a general headquarters.
Hey,
well,
Tom,
with that, I will be open to any questions anybody would like to ask or any more discussion.
While you're sharing the screen, Tom, can you go back to the map of the signal stations? We have a question from Chris Alone. Alone, I apologize if I'm mispronouncing your name, Chris.
This one?
No, it was the one. Well, yeah, that's fine. So you've got the Pry signal station there at the headquarters marked, and then you have the one on the ridge over there, the next one towards DC.
Yeah.
I know from standing at the Pry, his question, or the question from Chris is, for line of sight and elevations were better. Talk about the elevations there. And Tracey, you know, because you do some great programs on Signal Corps. I know that there's a great line of sight that goes up the hill to that signal station. I've never stood at your star where McClellan's headquarters actually was and looked that way. I'm assuming there's a decent line of sight there as well, or would they have maybe sent messages horseback or what?
Yeah, I've never done any investigating into the signal station that was in Keedysville. So I'm not familiar with that site at all.
Well, I didn't mention this, but within a day or two of the battle, they have run a telegraph line. I've got this in a note somewhere here. Hang on a second. But they run a telegraph line not long after the battle, so that by the 18th, I think, or 19th, he is in telegraphic communication, and they don't need the flags. Yeah, where am I?
And we know where the telegraph line was run from and to?
I just have a note from some people in the Telegraph Corps that says that they ran the line to Keedysville by the 18th. Let me see. On September 15th, McClellan sends a telegram to Governor Curtin of Pennsylvania, which is headed Boonsboro. On the 16th, he sends a telegram to Halleck, headed bivouac near Sharpsburg, indicating no camp set up yet. On the 17th, have no location stated, but by the 18th, he sends a telegram to Halleck that is headed Keedysville, which would mean that he is using the Keedys farm as a headquarters, and the telegraph line from Washington, D.C. to Hagerstown was extended to Boonsboro, and I quote, 3 miles to Keedysville, just in rear of McClellan's camp.
Huh.
So he's got a telegraph line there by the 18th. Also, because this is the medical museum, Dr. Agnew of the Sanitary Commission wrote this. Early on Friday, September 19th, I went to Keedysville and to General McClellan's headquarters. Now, a lot of people sort of ran that together and said, oh, he went to Keedysville and beyond to the Pry House. That includes the National Park Service fellow who wrote the historical report for the Pry House. I won't name him just out of courtesy. But anyway, but Agnew's report makes a clarifying statement. General McClellan moved his headquarters from Keedysville on Saturday, September 20th, to Sharpsburg. He didn't say move it from the Pry House to Sharpsburg. He said move it from Keedysville.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
So the medical people know what's going on.
Mhm.
So one more question about Signal Corps. Once they have a telegraph set up, would they have still used the flag system for other things?
Well, this communication from Pry House would all be flags because he's
Right.
flagging over to the rear of the East Woods and, to Burnside. There's a very good line of sight to all those things. It's not so good now because private property that the park doesn't own have let trees grow up that obscures the view. But in the winter, you can still get the view. So yeah, this is all flag, and you notice that they've got like 2 flags there to show this is a flag signal station.
Yeah.
And they are also flagging up to the signal station on Red Hill, which was established before the battle
Right.
and stayed there for some time.
Huh.
Yeah, there's that famous photograph taken of the signalers on the, they've erected a tower on Red Hill, signal tower.
Actually, that photograph is taken in October of '62. It's taken down on Mills Road behind the farm where McClellan had his headquarters after the battle from September 22nd.
Oh, okay
Yeah.
then.
Uh-huh.
Learn something else.
Many years ago, Dennis Fry and I went up there in a winter day. And like most of South County, that whole area had been charcoal. The Antietam iron furnace had at one point or another owned all of South County, and they clear cut all the timber to make charcoal to heat the ore for their iron furnace. And so all around on these high hills, you'll see what we call charcoal circles, where they would stack up the lumber and turn it into charcoal. The guys doing that would build little huts and stay there to make sure that it didn't burst into flame and destroy the timber, but it just kind of smoked it until it was charcoal. But up on the top of that hill behind the Mills house on Mills Road, there is a charcoal circle, but with a little bit of snow, you could clearly see the indentation of a rectangle. And nearby, we found several stacks of stones that had been chimneys for tents that had stayed there. That was the signal station.
Oh, that's awesome.
Safe Historic Antietam Foundation bought that property, oh boy, 1990s, maybe early 2000s at the latest. And we have put easements on it. We've secured the right to go up there anytime we feel like hiking up there. And then we sold the property with easements to an adjacent landowner. But we have preserved the site where that photo was taken. That's another mistake that Bill Frassanito made, was he called that signal station Red Hill, but we have good documentation. It's actually on Mills Road. And if you stop and think, I mean, on the 18th, 19th, 20th, Gardner's taking photos on the battlefield.
Mhm.
Why would he stop, go all the way up to the top of the Red Hill and photograph something as mundane as a signal station when he's over on the battlefield photographing bodies?
That makes sense.
Doesn't make any
Yeah.
sense at all for him to be there. But in October, when he comes out again, when Lincoln is visiting, because of those pictures of Lincoln and McClellan in the October visit are down on that Mills farm, and we have a sign designating that as McClellan's headquarters as well. That signal station was a half mile up the hill, and there was nothing else going on. He probably went up and photographed it.
So I have a question from our good friend Jack Richards, who's actually a board member with us, Tom, and who's watching us from the great state of Tennessee and Franklin, actually, where he retired because he loves him some Civil War with him and John Banks down there.
Oh my golly, yes.
They're running buddies, and if you want to talk, you got to check out John Banks's blog and the adventures Jack and John get into. But
I read John Banks regularly, yeah.
Yeah, he's the guy who Jack is the one who hypnotizes him on the battlefield. So shout out to Jack Richards.
That's great.
He asks and brings up a good point, because one of the stories we tell at the Pry House, since we staff manage and interpret that space from a medical perspective, are the reports that McClellan climbed up into the attic and stuck his head out of the trap door in the roof. A lot of old houses had a trap door that you could get up and maybe fix the shingles, I'm assuming, but we often go up there and poke our heads out and have always heard the story. And now that we're bringing it up, I don't know of any documentation about it. What do you know anything about that story of McClellan actually sticking his head up through that trap door to look at the battle in the Pry?
As far as I know, and I haven't dug deeply into this, but as far as I know, that too is a story from the Pry family. So it may well be true. The reason for the trap doors was to fight chimney fires, which were pretty common. If you were poor, you had a ladder tied to the roof that you could access from the ground. But if you're wealthy like the Prys, you had a hatch. And you could just get out onto the roof. And if you notice, it's right next to a chimney.
Yeah.
And so if a chimney catches fire, you can get onto the roof immediately and dump buckets of water down it. But yeah,
that sounds like you're running towards a fire and not away from a fire. I don't know if I'm doing that. I'm sending the kids up. I'm sending the kids up.
A good point. A good point. But yeah, I, as far as I know, it's a Pry family story, and could very well be the case. But as we know that he was there in the morning, but as Strother says, he left at 7:30. He's up on the lookout. He goes over and meets with Porter. He goes across the creek at least twice during the day. So he's moving around a lot. He didn't just sit at the Pry House all day observing the battle.
Well, I'm going to stop your sharing of the screen there, see if that works. Yep, and we're all
okay.
here again. I have one more big question for you about this. What did the National Park Service think of your research? So, I mean, when we heard about it, we were intrigued and immediately, invited you to do the program out at the Pry. And now that I wasn't able to attend that, but now that I hear all of your evidence and particularly the fact that it may have been Hooker's headquarters, it just makes our story that much more interesting to me. So I'm glad we did this, and I was going to be glad anyway. But my punchline is: so what did the National Park Service think of it when you said it?
Well, I wrote this first as an article for Civil War Times magazine. It was published in June of 2016, I think.
Yeah.
The article is something about prying around something. Yeah. Anyway, yeah. Antietam prying around the headquarters. That Dana Shoaf loves to do puns. So
yeah, he is king of fun.
Well, so I wrote that, and I live in Keedysville, and so I was out walking my dog one day, and I looked up, and in not a National Park Service vehicle, but a private car, I recognized two of the Interp Rangers of the battlefield, and I I said, what are you guys doing here? And they kind of hemmed and hawed and said, we're checking your story. And I said, great, please. I said, if I've made a mistake, let me know, because, and so they came back and said, yeah, you're right. And Keith Snyder, who is head of visitor services, is always very careful to call them Pry House McClellan's forward observation post.
Mhm.
So they acknowledge, and I've spoken to the superintendent, who I've known since the late 1970s, and she kind of said, yeah, well, we're going to have to get around to changing the sign one of these days. And that's been 6.5 years now. So
Yeah. I'm sure McClellan's forward observation post probably doesn't fit on the current sign, but we might get more visitors if we say Hooker's Headquarters.
Yeah,
Well, there
that
you
would
go.
be great to get that on there.
Makes
Mhm.
it unique. So,
Of course.
well, I just want you to know, Tom, we had a good viewership here, and we had folks from all over the country watching, from everywhere from Pennsylvania to Orange County, Virginia, Tucson, Arizona, Lantana, Florida, Santa Barbara, California, Chattanooga, even as close as Ellicott City. So you definitely have a good following here of people who know your reputation, and we greatly appreciate you taking the time to do this, because again, it'll enhance the story we can tell out at the Pry House, and we're excited whenever anybody goes down a rabbit hole and finds rabbits.
Well, like I say, I was trying to give Ethan Rafuse an answer to his question and just got pulled into more and more saying, hey, wait a minute, none of this seems to be accurate. So it's just, like you say, a rabbit hole. And I just kept going down it till I came out the other end and said, we need to change some things.
Yeah.
But always happy to help out the National Museum of Civil War Medicine. So no problem.
Thank you, Tom. I think it's been a really great presentation.
Well, I enjoyed it, and nice talking to you too, and to everybody else.
Yep. And I will let you know that our plan is to put this up on our YouTube channel in the coming days, slash hopefully within a few weeks. Usually we turn it around pretty quick. And that way you can share it with folks who might be interested in this story. And please do consider visiting the museum, any one of our locations. The Pry House is open seasonally, so definitely check the hours on that. But we have a great medicinal garden up there, which is the envy of many historic institutions, and actually colleges and universities come to us for the work that our volunteer Greg Susla and his lovely wife do for us there. And it's just a great place to visit if you come to Antietam. It's literally not on the driving map, but you'll understand why it was an observation post, because even with the trees, you can make out some features of the battlefield. And
that view from the ridge behind the house is terrific. And if I have the chance, I take every tour I can over there just to show them that.
Yeah, and my dream is we finally get a road up there so people can drive and park there, so it's fully accessible. But it's taken them 6 years not to change the sign, so we won't hold our breath for that.
Well, yeah, I hear you.
Yeah.
I hear you.
So feel free, if you end up, you viewers out there have any questions, feel free to email the museum, or get in touch with us, give us a ring, and please look for future programs like this and check out our YouTube. And again, thank you, Tom, and we will say goodbye and go ahead and sign off.
Yep. Thank you again, Tom.
Been a pleasure. Take care.
All right,
Thanks.
you too.